Boy, first service I had to break it up. Today you guys are like watching the clock, settling down, all good to go. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mark Davenport, one of the pastors at Redwood. Welcome this morning. We're glad you're here. If you are joining us, say, for the first time or you've been away for a few weeks, we are in the middle of a series called Small Things, Big Difference. And this series has looked at how small changes in the way that we set goals or talk to each other in our relationships or create motivation that propels us forward, how those kinds of small changes can make big differences in our lives. And a couple of weeks ago, you might remember if you were here that I asked that if folks had a small change and they were willing to share that with me, that I'd love to hear it. So I want to encourage you today. God is moving in us because a few of you got back to me actually about some of the changes that God's encouraging you in. One person said to me they felt like God was wanting them to initiate some connections with younger people and make some good time to spend with them. Another person said that they had decided they were now getting their Bible verses texted to them every day to force them to read them because they read all of their text messages. Somebody else said that they're now stepping out in faith with more confidence based on what they feel God has been speaking to them. So these are some great examples that I want you to hear because it tells you that you are not the only person pursuing change in your relationship with God to become more significant in your life, that He is speaking to us, which make these small changes and big differences possible. So I want to ask you today, are there habits in your life, things that you find yourself doing all the time, that if you were to make small changes in could make a big difference in the way that you live? Remember, it being the small changes, things that are small that we do that no one sees, that result in the big difference that we all want. So every morning, I get up and I make coffee and I grab my laptop and I check out the news websites that I enjoy reading every day. And that is my routine. I do that every single day, 7 days a week, without fail. And this is my habit. This is my routine. Now, what would happen if I stopped having my morning cup of coffee? Now, initially, I'd probably get a headache for a few days until my caffeine addiction subsided. I don't know what would happen to my coworkers at the office. And I know that there are some of you super health conscious folk out there that are probably thinking, Mark, do that. That would be good for you. I mean, I think you should try it. And, you probably would be right. But here is the thing. I like drinking coffee in the morning. And I'm Canadian, so I'm entitled to my cup of coffee. Amen. Right? I don't want to stop drinking coffee. Don't make me. So even if all you really health-conscious people out there could prove to me that this would, in the long run, be a better decision for me to stop drinking coffee, I'm going to be hard-pressed to stop because what I want to do right now rather is more important to me than to make a choice that might be better for me later. The habits that we have in our lives have been built by the type of disciplines that we've embraced. I don't know how many of you would consider yourselves very disciplined people. And if I took a survey right now, I might only get a few of you to admit that you were very disciplined. The people that we tend to think are the really disciplined ones are the ones who they may get up early every day to have a quiet time with God, or the very frugal people who are very careful with their spending, those folks who would maintain a really strict diet, or those who would never miss their daily workout. And there's folks like that here, I'm sure. In fact, I would put my wife in the category of being a very disciplined person. She tells me that she used to have braces on her teeth and that her dentist told her to never eat popcorn or peanuts, and that she actually never ate popcorn or peanuts for the 2 years she had braces on her teeth. And I said to her, come on. Had to have like one kernel of popcorn or one peanut, over 2 years. And her response to me was, nope, never did it. And she was told by the dentist to not do it, so she didn't do it. Now, that's a disciplined person. Me, on the other hand, I probably would have only cut down my popcorn eating to like once a week, something like that. Then there's those who might say this morning that we're undisciplined. We can't stick to a diet, or we don't necessarily follow through all the time on our Bible reading plans, or we skip our workouts because we don't feel like it. But here's the thing, those choices and those habits are shaped by a type of discipline. It's just not the right type of discipline. Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. And so all of us are successful in some part of our lives, and in those parts where we're successful, we've developed disciplines that have maintained that success. If you're successful financially, it's probably because you made a decision to save money to buy things rather than going into debt to get them, or maybe you've invested really well or regularly. Maybe you've trusted God in this area. You've given God 10% of what you've earned. You've seen God bless this generous heart that you've cultivated. Some of you have great health because you've made solid decisions to watch what you eat. You exercise regularly. You take your vitamins every day. You don't drink coffee. Good for you. And follow a plan to achieve your goals. In those examples, the right kind of discipline has helped you to succeed. And then there are those of us who have great intentions, but the discipline we've chosen to embrace is deciding that what we want now is more important to us. And we've acted on our impulses. We've developed our habits based on an unhealthy discipline that embraces a culture of now, rather than considering that perhaps what we want most is just unattainable. So we've settled for what we know that we can get. But the truth is that the thing that we want most, deep inside of us, is possible, but if we are willing to embrace small changes that will assist us in developing good discipline, that will help us make big differences in our lives that we really want. So my questions for us is that if it only takes some tweaking or some small changes in our disciplines, which on the surface seem manageable, why is that so stinking hard? Why is it that it seems that we find it so difficult to make the kind of changes in our lives to embrace what we want most over what we want now? And do those questions cause you to wonder what's wrong with us? It makes me wonder about my own life, for sure. It makes me honestly not understand myself. And if you're like me and you find yourself a bit discouraged by this, then I want to bring you some encouragement. One of the greatest spiritual leaders to ever have existed happens to be this guy named Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament. And he struggled, just like we do. And he talks about that struggle. And I want to look at that with you today from Romans 7. In verse 15, Paul says this, I don't really understand myself. That sounds really familiar. For I want to do what's right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. Any of you beside me relate to that? Can you relate to wanting to do what's right and not doing it? We say we desire to walk in life disciplines and focus around the most important thing, the most immediate thing. We say that we want the most important thing, but so often the decisions we make don't make that a reality in our lives. We succumb to the desire of the moment. And whether it's laziness or whether it's a lack of motivation, we simply don't make the choices to embrace the later rather than the now. And Paul says, instead, I do what I hate. And how many of you, after you failed again at something that you said you weren't going to do, get disgusted with yourself? And we're disgusted in part because I think we know who we could be, but we struggle to control the current me. Why do we do what we hate? Well, partly because I don't think we hate the thing we do enough, but also because at the core of who we are, I believe we're selfish. We want a shortcut. We want easy. We want the surety of today more than we want the promise of tomorrow. And at the core of who we are is sinful. Paul says this in verses 18 to 20. He says, "And I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it." Now, I actually really love this because I really want to be able to blame something other than me for doing something wrong. I mean, that desire to blame something other than me goes back to the beginning of man's story when God says to Adam, "Hey, why did you eat that thing I told you not to eat?" And he goes, "It wasn't me, it was Eve. She's the one who told me." So he goes over to Eve and says, "Why did you eat that thing I told you not to?" She says, "It wasn't me, it was the snake." You know, believe me when I tell you, I love verse 20 when Paul says, "It's sin living in me that does it, it's not me." And this might be true, but I'm just not sure how much traction I'm going to get on that when I have a fight with my wife over something and try to get out of it by saying, "Karen, it wasn't me, it was the sin living in me that did it." You know, Paul is right when he says this, but, you know, being right about the source of the problem doesn't help us solve the problem. You see, it's sin that lives in us that's driving us to make the bad choices that we find ourselves making. And this is super important for us to see because, and I'm going to be honest here, we don't really like to talk much about sin. You know, it's easier for us to talk about our bad choices or things we've done wrong or maybe the need to ask forgiveness, but we really don't want to talk a lot about sin. And I'll tell you why. It's because in today's day and age, that word sin feels pretty judgmental to us. It's like to say, well, who are you to judge me and tell me what in my life is sin? And I know that there may be things for where what might be sin for you might not be sin for what might be sin for me might not what is sin for you based on my conscience or the conviction of the Holy Spirit, but there's plenty of other truths and definitions about what sin is and what God says it is that are not debatable. But we're all falling into these various realms of sin. And then Paul says, "I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what's wrong." And I don't know if there's anyone out there who also feels that this is true in their life, because this could be the very first sentence of an autobiography of Mark Davenport. In this verse, Paul doesn't just say, though, that he's discovered the truth for himself. He says he's discovered this truth as a principle of life. In other words, all of us want to do what is right, but inevitably we do what is wrong. We need to understand this fact, which is we can't make it on our own. We can't. We can't just try to will ourselves into right behavior because there is a limit to our willpower. There is a limit to our ability to self-manage and become more disciplined and make the right choices. And it's a sad thing for us to admit that inevitably we do what's wrong. Paul then says in verse 22, "I love God's law with all my heart, but there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. And this power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am." You know, we can love God with everything we have and everything we are and be completely committed to Him and to our faith, and yet there is still a power in us that is consistently pushing us in the wrong direction. Oh, what a miserable person I am. I've said that a few times. I don't know if you've said that a few times about yourself. How often are we feeling that about ourselves because we've blown it one more time, we failed again one more time, we've disappointed ourselves or someone else again. And what I want us to see today is that this thing called sin that lives inside of us is there because of the sinful nature that we're born into. You know, notice it's called the sinful nature. I mean, nature is this basic or inherent feature of something. I mean, it's not something you acquire. It's not something you go to school to learn. It's something that you're born with, just like you're born with 2 ears and a nose and a mouth. You're born with a sinful nature. You know, I know it stinks that this is true, but it's true anyways. And our propensity to do what is wrong is a result of the sinful nature that lives in us that's compelling us to sin. And on our own and with our own strength, we are unable to stop it. We are not naturally self-disciplined people. And if we want to be more disciplined in the areas that we want to change, it's going to require more than just a casual tweak in our lifestyles. A casual swipe at changing your sin nature is not going to cut it. And Paul understood this, and look at the discovery that he makes. In verse 24, he says, "Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death?" And then he says, "Thank God, the answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord." Paul tells us that the answer is not in a what or in a principle. The answer is in a who. And the who that Paul describes is not the who that's down in Whoville. The who is Jesus. The answer lies in a person, not just a plan. Now, a plan could be an important part of how we get there, but the plan is developed with the power and the strategy of this who named Jesus, who gives us what we need to accomplish the plan and make the changes that we need to make. But this plan I'm talking about becomes our biggest challenge because so often the plans that we make are derived from our distorted ideas of who we think we are. And the perceptions we have about ourselves come from an unhealthy picture of our identity, which actually sabotages our success. You see, our enemy, Satan, tells you that who you are not, and he connects your failures to your identity. We're consistently hearing these negative voices in our heads telling us that we didn't do it right, that we aren't good at what we're trying to do. These voices tell us we're miserable people, we did bad, and we are bad. And if you can relate to that, let me just tell you, you're in really good company. Because these were the same voices that were inside the heads of some of the Bible's all-stars. Moses said he couldn't do what God asked him to do because he wasn't really a good speaker. And Gideon told the angel he couldn't do what God was telling him to do because he was the weakest guy in his family. And even Paul, who we've been reading from, struggled and told us that he was the least and he was unworthy. Maybe those are the kind of voices ringing in your head today. Maybe you would say you have an addictive personality. Maybe you would say you drink too much. Maybe you would say you're undisciplined, that you spend too much money, that you're a shopaholic. Maybe you would say you're disorganized, can't keep all the details of your life in order, so your house is a mess, and your car is a mess, and you are a mess. And no matter what you do to try to get yourself back together, you always end up back in the same spot, frustrated all over again that you failed. And when this happens too many times, it's not a surprise that we just give up. We then make a determination that we simply can't do the things that we know that we really want to do because we have grabbed hold of an identity that has trapped us into the choices that we've made. And if this is true, how are we ever going to be able to do what God wants us to do? What I want us to see this morning is that it's an unhealthy identity that creates unwise habits. It's these bad habits that reinforce the unhealthy identity. And when you don't have a proper understanding of who you really are, then the things that you do reinforce that distorted identity. So how do we break this cycle of dysfunction? I mean, what can we do that would make a big difference in the way that we can approach our lives? How about deciding that we want to change the type of goals that we set for ourselves? So in our most ambitious moments, when we finally decided that things are going to be different, and we've said we're ready to embrace change, and you guys know what I'm talking about here, it's that point where you look at yourself in the mirror or you step off the scale and you say, that's it! I'm sick of this! I'm making a change. I'm calling the gym today. Or the phone has rung for the 20th time this week from some collections person and you're like, oh my gosh, can I take this one more time? I am calling that debt counselor person that so-and-so referred me to and I'm making an appointment and I'm going to get these finances in gear. Or maybe you've woken up with a hangover again and you said, oh man, I am getting too old for this. I've got to stop going to the bar on Saturday night. Whatever it is that's gotten you to that place of decision making, when that happens, what we do is we make do goals. Now, do goals are the things that we decide that we are going to do or that we are not going to do. You decide you're going to go on a diet, or you're going to join the gym, or you're going to stop going to the mall, or you're going to stop smoking or drinking, or you're going to read more, you're going to go to bed earlier, whatever. These are do goals. So consider this morning changing your type of goal from a do goal to a who goal. Now, what is a who goal? A who goal is deciding who do you want to become. A who goal is to decide you want to be a man of God or a woman of God, or to be a sober and clean person, or to be a healthy person, or to be a financially free person. When we make a who goal instead of a do goal, we begin to shape our identity into being the person we really want to be, because it's our identities that shape our actions. Friends, when you know who you are, then you know what to do. If you decided you want to be a clean and sober person, then that decision drives your choice to not drink or do drugs any longer. If you've decided you want to be a clean and healthy person, then the next time someone offers you a cigarette, it's your decision to be a clean person that drives your answer to them that says, no thanks, I'm not a smoker anymore. It's the same when you open the freezer and you're tempted by that delicious chocolate Haagen-Dazs that's in there. And you can shut the freezer door not because you're trying to follow a diet, but because you've decided you're going to be a healthy person. Look at what Paul tells us about what it means to have our identities shape our actions. From Romans 6, he says, we know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are no longer slaves to sin, for when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of sin. Paul tells us that when we identify with Jesus, when we line up our identities with who we are in Him, the power of sin and the stuff that we're naturally drawn into loses its grip over our lives. Paul then says this in verse 18. Now you are free from your slavery to sin, and you have become slaves to righteous living. You know, being a slave to something means that our power to choose is extremely limited. In this verse, Paul says that it's our limited choices go from an I can't help it disposition towards sinful things, which is like me saying something stupid, saying, oh, I just can't help it. It just comes out of my mouth. To an I can't help it disposition towards righteous things. Being a slave to righteous living means me being able to say, I can't help being kind to people. I can't help it. I just want to serve people. Or I can't help being a generous person. That's just who I am. That's what it means to be a slave to righteous living. You see, it's our identities that shape our actions. A healthy identity creates positive habits, and positive habits reinforce a healthy identity. Who do you want to become? That's a question for you today. I'd like to be the guy that worries less over things he can't control. I want to be a guy who loves Jesus, who is loving his wife, who's being an unselfish person, who's wanting to serve the church. And if I say I want to become these things, then my actions are going to flow out of the desire to become the person that I say that I want to be. Who do you want to become? Do you want to be a person who believes in people and wants to do more to make a difference in this community? Do you want to be a man or a woman who's trusted in significant realms of health or influence or money and time and uses those things to glorify God? Do you want to be a more generous person with your time and money? Do you really want to become that person of God that puts Jesus first in everything that you do? Ask yourself, what would the person I want to be do? When you define who you want to be, then you can figure out what you need to do. If you want to be a godly man or woman, what does that kind of person do? If you want to be a healthy person, what does a healthy person do? If you want to be a financially free person, what does a financially wise person do with their money? Here's the thing, no single action changes your identity, but small actions and changes over time begin to change the way that you see yourself, and those actions and changes eventually change your identity. And those small things and small changes can make a huge difference in the way that you see yourself and the way that your life looks. The good news is that you don't have to be perfect. And that's really good news, because newsflash, you're not going to be. You're not going to be perfect. There are going to be days where you eat too much or skip your workout one day or lose your cool or make an impulse purchase. And just because we mess up doesn't mean that we can't succeed in becoming the people we say that we want to be. And instead of considering yourself a failure when that happens, because it will, then we start again. So I want to ask you today, I want to challenge you, take a risk, decide to be the person that is your destiny to become, and lean on Jesus and not yourself to show you what you need to do. And that's okay, because this journey isn't about what you do. It's about who you're becoming. One small step at a time. And Jesus understands this, and He understands us. And that's why He said to the disciples that they needed to eat His body and drink His blood so that they could be a part of Him. And if you're new to faith, Jesus isn't talking literally here. He's not supporting cannibalism. But we eat the bread and we drink the juice this morning as a symbol of our desire to partner with Him in this journey of life. Jesus told us to do this in remembrance of Him, and that's why we do this here at Redwood. We not only want to remember Jesus, we want to reach out to Him today and ask Him to help us. And we're saying today, together, that we recognize and understand that we cannot live the kind of lives that we truly want to live without being empowered by the Spirit of God. I want to encourage you today to empty yourself. Empty yourself of your strategies and your ideas for how you're going to make life changes. And instead, choose to receive the power of Jesus this morning as you eat and drink at the tables today. So I want to invite you to the tables. You're welcome to come if you say that you have a relationship with Jesus. And if you would say you don't have a relationship with Him, but you want one, and invite Him to come and partner with you right now. All it takes is an invitation from you to come to Jesus, who is waiting for you with open arms to receive you. It's as simple as a prayer that you could pray as I'm saying this, which is, Jesus, I'm a sinner. I need your help. Please forgive me. Take me as I am today. I need you. And that's it. Amen. And if you prayed that prayer, come to the tables and enter into the joy that's waiting for you there. We're going to be entering now a time of worship. There's a couple of tables down front here, a couple in the back. And I want to invite you to come to the tables when you are led, when you feel ready, and let the power of the Spirit of God fill you this morning. So come.